Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel, and in this video we are back on the Warlord Titan part 4 and we are going to be doing the Bellicosa Volcano Cannons. So these are the two huge arm mounted weapons that this guy carries, and I'm going to show you how I've put these together, any tips and tricks that I've learnt along the way, and a nice little guide on magnetising the armour panel to the side of it as well. So big things about trying to make weapons interchangeable on Forge World kits is you don't always get every component that you need in a box set to be able to easily interchange weapons. So you have to come up with some ingenious ways to be able to do that. One of the things we need to do is magnetise some armour panels, and I'm going to show you that at the end of the video. So here we go then guys, this is what you get for the Bellicosa Volcano Cannon, a nice little pretty white box. Now these cannons are sold singularly, unlike the carapace weapons, the laser blasters, laser destroyers, and you can pick and choose your weapons. I think the only other one at the moment is the Power Fist and the Sun Fury cannon. But this is what we're aiming to achieve. So I've obviously got two of these, one for each arm, and we're looking here at a completed version. And you notice I've already pre-drilled where I'm going to be pinning this to the main arm. So let's take a look at what's inside the box. So once we lift the lid, we get a nice instruction manual. Now again, once again, this is one of these new fancy CAD designed, CGI designed instruction manuals, so you can see what these weapons do, where they can go, a full parts list, and then a full construction guide that's far more detailed than any of those old photocopies that we know and hate. So once we take the instructions out, we get a nice little layer of bubble wrap, and then we get some bags and some loose components. And as you can see, this one is completely untouched. I've not made any effort on this one at all. You can see all the injection mold gates, all the triangles and everything else that needs to be cut off before we can start putting this together. So the large pieces are all loose, and then we have the smaller cable sections and the barrel end as well sat inside a nice little bag. So we just open the bag up, just make sure that everything is here. So you can see there's two ribbed cabling sections that go left and right. There's a ribbed cabling section that goes underneath, and then there's the barrel end. And you can see sort of vaguely how this sort of goes together really. Actually that's the wrong way around, but just sort of getting an idea of the size of the gun. So we get a big heat sink that goes at one end, and then we have a barrel section at the other. And then, as I said, we get these cables. We also get on that barrel end piece, there's a weird sort of little long section, and that's what you use to attach that side armour panel with. So there's two armour panels here, one that goes on the side and one that goes all the way across the top. And you can see that one that goes across the top is quite badly warped, but that's an easy fix. So what we want to do now is just make sure that all the parts are present before we even start the build. So just sort of going through all the sections here, making sure that everything is present and correct, so that you don't end up sort of halfway through and go, you know what, I'm actually missing a rather key component, and that would be bad. What we need to do then is clean up all the components. So I've got my trusty razor saw. I actually use a Games Workshop one, but any jeweler's saw will do the job. You can probably get away with a hacksaw, but what you're looking to do is hack away these large injection gates. And what you can do is actually line the saw up with a flush edge of the main resin piece, and that will help you guide the saw so that you get a nice straight cut. So what I'm going to do is just start cutting this one away here, and just sort of gently letting the saw do the work. Try not to do too much pressure, just let the saw do all the work for you. Now, it does help if the saw is relatively sharp. I know these ones can end up losing a few teeth on them. I've had this particular one for quite some time now. It's actually doing me alright at the moment, so I've not actually replaced it with anything different at the moment. But as you can see, once you cut through those three connecting points, you end up with a relatively flush surface if you've been really careful with your saw. But you can always go back to your scalpel and just make sure that anything that's superfluous is cut off. And you can see also there's a lot of whole injection points as well, little gates or whatever you want to call them that come out of the mould. So it's normally a sort of little bit of mould seepage, and they can be trimmed away very carefully with your scalpel. So there's a whole bunch in between these heat sinks, to be honest, and they all need to be nicely removed. And if they sort of leave any kind of rough edge, you really want to get some sandpaper in there or a file and just file those away. And what we're going to do is just cut the remainder off of those off of camera, and then we end up with all the parts all relatively cleaned up, not 100% cleaned up. There's still a few bits and pieces still to do, but you can now see exactly how the gun goes together. And sort of get an idea now at this stage of how good or bad the fit is going to be. So you can actually see and feel, you're really going on feel and look here to see whether there's any sort of major wobbles or how much gap is going to be there and how much gapping is going to be required to be filled with green stuff later on. Now you can see when I was cutting mine apart there, these two sort of, I don't even know what these pieces would really be called, to be honest, but they run underneath the barrel. One of them did snap. I was a little bit heavy-handed. And to be honest, that happened on the other build as well, so I didn't learn my lesson. But it's an easy fix because there's 2 points of connection, so you can see here, one goes on there and then the other one goes on the other side. And then the barrel end actually holds those two loose ends right at the very top together anyway, so not a big deal when that snaps. As long as it's a clean break, it will go exactly together and you won't even notice that it's gone. There's a whole bunch of cables, as I mentioned at the opening of the unboxing here. So there's sort of left and right heatsink ones, and there's a one that goes underneath, but you can't really put those on yet until you put the main part of the weapon together. So exactly like that, you see that connects between the main sort of body and the heatsink, and there's one on either side. Now these can be heat bended. I did notice when I was test fitting here that one of them wouldn't go perfectly flush, so that would need a little bit of heat treatment just to sort of make sure that bends in a little bit more, so when it comes to gluing it's in the right place. Now this is the armour panel bracket, and it can go left or right sided because these Volcano cannons are ambidextrous. They can go left or right of your warlord. You can place that on either side and that will make the weapon basically left or right handed for you. And that is, yeah, that's where the armour panel attaches to. You can see there's sort of 3 points of connection here. However, when you put that armour panel on, it will cover up that cylindrical point where you want to pin the main weapon to the body. Now if you want to make these weapons interchangeable, which is what I do, I'll be doing a magnetisation guide towards the end to show you how I'm going to make that armour panel easily removable by attaching it only with magnets. And I think that's a really good idea, especially if you want to swap this out for the Power Fist or for the Sun Fury cannon, and then you can make sure that these are fully interchangeable on your warlord. Now it's such a large set of resin pieces, what I'm going to do is Dremel and drill the barrel to the main body and also the heatsink. Even though the JB Weld I'm pretty sure would hold, I just want to put in a couple of sections of 3mm brass rod just for that extra strength within the build. So what I'm doing here is just sort of picking out a point that I know that I can easily line up on two pieces. So this is slightly keyed. There's a middle raised section that you can just sort of make out there on the main body of the weapon, and that goes into a receiving sliding component on the other one. And so that's an easy way to sort of guess about sort of 5 or 6mm up and just drill the two holes corresponding to each other. And that's a pretty easy way of sort of guessing, really. It is a little bit of guesswork, but if you're fairly familiar and you're fairly good with your geometry, you can easily work it out. So what you need to do now is just cut the brass rod. I've got a set of old knackered cutters here, and it is a little bit of a pain. You can hacksaw this, or you can use another cutting disc of some kind, but it's only 3mm, so you can get through it. I wouldn't recommend it if you're doing it for 5mm. You'll be here all day. Now, as I said before on the laser blasters, if you haven't catched that video, go and have a look at that one, because there's some similar techniques used in that. Now, if you find that the holes are either slightly out of alignment or they're a little bit snug fitting, then you can use your Dremel here, just as I am there, and just gently make that receiving pinhole a little bit wider. And that will enable the pin to go in nice and easy, and then you'll be able to locate that on the other component as well. And the JB Weld or super glue, whichever you're going to use, I still recommend JB Weld, will hold this component completely solid. Now, as you can see, I'm just going to test the pin connection here and make sure that I'm all aligned. And you know, just a little bit of experience here, really, I've got that right first time. So you can see that pin there, it's about 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, and then that just goes into the other one there, and that is a perfect fit. So I was quite happy that I got that right first time. But again, if this is your first ever one of these, then you might want to spend a bit of time, maybe even mark it out. And what you can do is, if you put one pin in one end and glue it, then paint the other end with a little bit of red paint, and then press the other part into it as if it's going to be connecting. That will leave a little red dot on the receiving end, and you'll know exactly where to drill. So again, I'm going to be doing the same on this one, just making sure that the components are completely flush where they're going to fit. There's a couple of little excess parts here that I'm just trimming off now, just to make sure that is a nice smooth connection. And then what we'll do is we'll drill this one as well. So once I'm fairly happy with that, I'm just going to score the side of it. As I've done before, that makes any bonding glue or JB Weld just that little bit more surface area to connect to. Just double check that they fit. Remember, with Forge World stuff, you measure and test twice and drill only once. And then we can just put everything together and just make sure that we're entirely happy. So once again, just double checking that that is 100% happy before I get the Dremel out again. I'm fairly happy with that heatsink connection. And then what we'll do is we'll just do the front barrel connection as well. So you can see there's sort of two receiving blocks on each of these. And that means that, again, it's an easy lineup for your Dremel. So what I'm going to do is actually go in above those receiving blocks. About a couple of millimeters up. As you can see there, I'm just putting it slap bang in the middle, and it's an easy guide because you've got those two blocks already done for you. And then just drill in and rotate the barrel as you do it to make sure that your Dremel is going in straight and not at an angle. If you go in at an angle and then you do a straight drill on the other side, then your pin is going to go a bit wonky and it won't fit together properly. So just sort of feathering out the receiving hole there a little bit more, just to make sure that I've got a little bit of wiggle room there for when the two components go together. And then we'll do exactly the same on the main part of the weapon. And again, sort of eye gauging here exactly where that hole's got to go, and it's about there. Once we've made our decision where that hole's going to go, it's just a case of then dremeling out that receiving hole to about, I think I'm doing about an inch in on this one, so it's a 2-inch-ish pin, but whatever suits. I mean, you can make it a little bit longer, to be honest. It's not a big deal. If you're hand drilling this though, using a pin vise, probably going to take you a little bit longer to drill those holes out. So I do recommend an electric drill or Dremel. So just going to test fit that pin as well then. So we just put it into the barrel end and then get it onto the main part of the weapon. And then just test fit to make sure the two parts go nicely together. And once again, that is a perfect bit of pinning there. So that is all perfectly lined up on the barrel to the main body of the weapon. So very happy with those two drilling parts. And that is pretty much it. All we've got to do now is cut that other pin off. It's about, as I said, it's about 2 inches-ish. To sort of gauge it, you know, I've got another pin there, and just compare sizes, and then we're all good to go. Just cut that piece of brass rod, and then we can move on to actually using JB Weld to put these three components together. As you can see, these cutters are a little bit blunt, and it does require a little bit of brute force here to cut through them. But with this video, exactly the same as the other ones for the Warlord, I'm trying to show as much detail as possible, the pain and the effort that I'm going through to put this guy together. Now eventually I managed to cut through that. A little bit more work down the gym perhaps. Just once again, just make sure everything is okay with the new pin, and then we're all good. So just fully assemble, as it were, the three main components of the weapon, just for 100% clarity's sake, and we're all good. So we can now move on to the adhesive, the JB Weld for this. Again, if you haven't seen my other Warlord Titan videos, JB Weld is a cold weld 2-part solution. It's used in car part repairs and so on. It is superb stuff for adhering your super large resin toy soldiers. So just mix up the two parts of this. So there's a black component and then a very pale light grey, or it's almost white, creamish colour, whatever. But when it's mixed together, it forms like a light grey colour that you can see I've already pre-mixed in this little plastic container here. This plastic container is actually the back of my Gorilla Glue super glue packet, so it's an easy little thing to use. It's cheap, it's free, well, free packaging really, and then you can throw that away afterwards. But while we go through the build, I'm just going to reuse that same little container. Another one that I have used for doing this is the bottom end of a Coke bottle or a fizzy drinks bottle. That always works as well. Anything to try and contain that JB Weld. Once the JB Weld has been mixed together, I'm just applying a piece to the end of this particular pin. In fact, I'll do it to all the pins here so that there's a bit of JB Weld in the recess where you've just drilled out that hole. And also score up or mark all of the surface areas that you're going to be connecting together so that they're not this smooth surface. If you're using any adhesive, if you're not using JB Weld and you're using super glue for this, highly recommend that you do some fairly sensibly large cuts into the resin, and that gives that super glue a little bit more surface area to work with instead of that smooth surface where the super glue is just going to try and bond two smooth surfaces. It can then seep into those little cracks and scrapes that you've put onto it, and also give it a light sanding as well, just to roughen up those edges. You really don't want to be super gluing super smooth to super smooth. It would be a lot better if you did that as well. So I'm just applying my JB Weld to this side, and I'll apply a little bit onto the other side as well, and just gives it a little bit more purchase. Just once I'm happy with where this is all going to go. Remember, if you have some large gaps between the two surfaces that you're going to do, I recommend that you do a little bit more so that when you push the two pieces together, it kind of seeps out a little bit and fills those gaps. So I'm just going to test here and just put these two together. In fact, I forgot to roughen this edge up, so I'm just going to lightly score these surfaces as well. Just like that, just using, I mean, they're not big scrapes because I am using JB Weld, but just enough to roughen that edge up a little bit more. And then we push those two pieces together, give them a good squeeze, and then that's pretty much it. But what I do is not want to be holding this forever, so we'll get on to how we're going to hold these two components without using your hands. So what we're going to do is apply the JB Weld to the heatsink section then, so that we've got all three of these main components fully adhesived up. So just going to get onto the other end here and just give that a good dollop of JB Weld. Now the astute amongst you would notice that the barrel section has mysteriously come off. That's because I didn't apply enough of this stuff. So I've mixed up a little bit more here because I just didn't do enough, to be honest. It wasn't holding, and when I took the two components away, you can see that the adhesive hadn't seeped onto the other parts at all because there was just that little bit too much of a gap. So I just need to make sure that I've mixed a little bit more up. And again, you know, this is all part of the trials and tribulations of working with FORGEWORLD and doing a live-ish video, so you can see all of the elements that go together when you make something of this kind of nature. So I just want to put some more of this JB Weld on. We're going to go both sides here. You can see on that side, that's the side that the barrel was supposed to be on, and you can see there's none of this grey paste on this side because the stuff on the barrel end just wasn't making good enough contact. So I'm just going to put some on this side, make sure it goes into that little gap down the middle because that's a key joining point, and then just smooth it all over, and then that should be about enough. Then we'll just apply some to the other end as well, ready for the heatsink to go on, and then we should be good to go this time. So just put the barrel on this time, and that feels a little bit better actually. You can instantly feel the difference because the two adhesives on each side just you can just feel the difference basically. So what we're going to do is make sure that's fully aligned, and then we can continue on with the heatsink side. Just get that grey JB Weld. How many times am I mentioning JB Weld? I think I should be on commission, but it is the best stuff to use. So just put that over to one side while we get this paste onto the heatsink section as well. So there should be just about enough pre-mixed in here. As before, just put some on the end of the pin there so that goes into the receiving hole, and then just sort of score this surface exactly the same as we've done with the barrel end as well. Just give it a light little scoring because these resin parts are very smooth, and you don't really want to be doing that smooth to smooth adhesive, as I've overly laboured the point earlier. So again, practice your frosting technique, your icing technique, and give it a good little smooth either with whichever applicator you're using. Again, I've got one of these little plastic spatula things. I think that came with like a PVA glue adhesive that I had for a long time ago, but it's perfectly handy for applying this stuff. And just as a reminder, if you haven't watched the other videos, this stuff will ruin your clothes. It does get everywhere, so have some kitchen roll or some tissue paper available, and don't be working in your Sunday finest, because as soon as you get it into your clothes, it will ruin them. You can't get it out. But it's not particularly nasty to your skin. I mean, I wouldn't, you know, wouldn't bathe in it is probably the best advice. But just be very careful with it, and if you're really unsure about working with these kind of things, then get some rubber gloves and then you'll be fine. So I think I've got enough of this stuff on here then to squeeze these two components together, just being really careful that the front section doesn't dislodge, and then just slide that into the receiving pin, and we have the full build of the three main parts done. Now it's a case of connecting these so that you haven't got to sit there and hold them while this stuff dries. It kind of goes off, I guess, in about 30 minutes, but you really want to leave it for a full 24 hours. And I have no clamps that are big enough to hold this, but I do have these very long cable ties or zip ties. And this is going to be perfect for holding these components together while they dry overnight. However, even with these two, you can't go from the barrel tip to the heatsink end, and you don't really need to, because there's this nice little piece of resin that sticks out on the side here that is all part of the main barrel, and I can zip tie around that quite happily. Once I've got the base sort of secured there, just pull the zip ties tight and you can see just how this is going to work really. So there's this little lug here that I'm just aiming for that the zip tie will attach nicely to. Just keep pulling it tight, and eventually the zip tie can't go any further, and that is your optimum position. And then once we're happy that the zip ties are tight enough, just double check each end where these are being where these connect to each other, and I think I'm pretty good there. I mean, there's no sort of slack in those zip ties, so that is as tight as it's going to get, and that should be good enough to hold all three of these components together whilst that JB Weld begins to set. And then once we're done here, we can put that to one side and we can have a look at the rest of the components. I'm fairly happy with the way that's bolted together, and then we can move on. Now, 24 hours have approximately passed. I think I finished this section sort of one night and then the next night. So it's, yeah, 24 hours-ish. So it's probably about 20 to be honest. And then we can move on to all the cable sections. So test fitting these cable sections, I think I mentioned right at the start of this video that these cables, one of them fitted perfectly and the other one was a little bit out, and I'm trying to show that on camera. So as you sort of test fit, especially with these sort of little pieces, you really do want to make sure that they are as good as they're going to be. And you can see, can you just about see here? I think that one is okay, but when we go to the other side, it's just not quite right. And it just doesn't fit in as smooth, and it's sort of a little bit raised up on the main body. So this is where you want to go and run it under a hot tap, or dip it into some slightly, some very warm water, or even use a hairdryer. Although with small components like this, if you use a hairdryer, you are probably going to burn your fingers. So I recommend using the water technique really, and just use a pair of tweezers or something like that. Dip it in the water until it begins to soften, and then you can bend it into the right shape. Now that other main ribbed cable was no problem at all, that would fit in. So what we can do is we can glue these other sections in. I'm just going straight with super glue here, and we can glue the ones that are okay, and then we can heat bend the ones that aren't okay and then come back to them. So this one was a fine fit, so that went straight on, no problem whatsoever. Now I've been away and I've heat bended this particular component here, this other set of cables, and as you can see that just goes in a lot better than it did 2 minutes ago on the video, so we can now attach that one. It was only sort of a couple of millimeters out, so it didn't really take any time at all. I just ran it under a hot tap between my fingers and then just sort of pressed it until it sort of budged a little bit, then switched the hot water off, put some cold water on so that it didn't bend any further, and then we're all good, and that now perfectly fits. So we can just super glue that piece in, and then we can move on to the next section. Now the next section that I'm going to do, I'm not going to do that other cable just because it just kind of gets in the way when you're resting the piece when it's drying, is these under barrel energy components. The actual instructions list these as, because they've got just right barrel and left barrel support, so yeah, interesting name. But they look like they've got some energy dissipation pieces to them, perhaps. I don't really know. They're just added bits of detail so that it's not just that fancy little single barrel. This is the one that I hadn't broken. Again, with these pieces, they do tend to come a little bit warped. They're not perfectly straight. So while I was bending that cable earlier, I did sort of straighten these up as well. and you can see there that's no problem there. That attaches quite fine. And then while I'm holding that one, I can just apply glue to the other half. Now bear in mind I did break this one by accident, but as you'll see in a second, it goes together without an issue. So I'm just making sure that just applying the glue there one-handed off camera, and then that sort of section just goes on there. Now what we can do here, again to save your hands, is the magic elastic bands, and get those in and around where you want these sections to be drying. So just double loop over there and get those elastic bands in place, and then that means you haven't got to worry about your hands having to sit there while super glue dries. I mean, super glue does tend to dry pretty quick, but what you really want to do is make sure that it's drying with pressure, so that any kind of slippage means that it doesn't set away from where it's supposed to be. So if you're doing super glue like this, you really want it to be pressed into where it's going to go, so that you don't end up with any kind of slippage or it drying in the wrong position. So these elastic bands are perfect for that. So once that one's in at the bottom there, holding the broken piece and the normal piece, we can go back to that top section, make sure that's all perfectly okay. As you can see, that is now relatively straight. It's not 100% perfect, but the barrel end will sort that out. So we just apply the super glue where we need to there, so that's on where it's supposed to go, which is to fix the two components together, and then the other section into the end of the barrel there. And as you can see, you can't even tell that that was ever broken, to be honest. And what we can do now is just apply another elastic band at the top here, where those sections attach to the main barrel. So that's the area of pressure that you want to be applying. So those elastic bands are there, and then we are all good. Just making sure that that broken piece is fully aligned, and you just really can't tell that there's a problem. So then there's the barrel tip, which connects to the two underarms there, and then directly onto the barrel. A little bit of movement there just on that end, because it isn't 100% straight, but it's good enough that when you super glue it all together, we're not going to have any problems. So just attach that barrel tip, and then all we have left to do is that final little ribbed cable, and then we can work on magnetising that side armour plate. So we can just attach that piece now that the glue's been applied, just making sure that those barrel supports are in the correct little location. There's a little receiving lug for those, and what we want to do is just hold a bit of pressure down on this barrel tip to make sure that it begins to dry. But again, elastic bands are your friends, or you can cable tie at this point as well, and just make sure that that barrel tip doesn't come loose, because it is holding those two under barrel guides in place. So what I'm going to do is actually apply a couple of elastic bands here, and that will do the job nicely for me here. You can see here exactly what I've done with the elastic bands. I've got one going to the bottom side of it and one going to the top side, and that just sort of evens out the distribution of pressure, and then that is perfectly fine. And we can just put in that last little ribbed cable here that goes between the main barrel and that heatsink, and there was no bending required here. It fits quite nicely, exactly the same as the other one did, to be honest. So that's a good fit. Just push that into place there, and then that is the majority, or the main part of the weapon done. All we now need to do is work on the armour panels and the mounting arm for those. And there we go. So you can see here now that's both of those Bellicosa Volcano Cannons complete, and I've got the 4 armour panels and the 2 armour panel side mounting brackets in front of me here. And what we want to do is work out how to magnetise these. Now this isn't super complicated. So what I've got here are some 4mm round magnets, and it's just a case of trying to work out where best to place these in this receiving bracket. Bear in mind that the armour panel is quite thin in some places, and if you were to drill that out, you would end up going through the armour panel and out onto the detail that you're going to see, and that is one thing you really want to avoid. So just trying to work out exactly how to do this, and we come up with a relatively simple solution. And what I'm going to use is 4 magnets in total, and what I'm going to have to do is remove a couple of the the male sections of that bracket or that mount, so that these magnets can go in. So instead of having the receiving section it's quite difficult to explain really. So there's 3 sections that go into that armour panel, as you can see just about on the bottom of that video. I'm going to remove 2 of those and replace them with magnets, and then drill out those receiving sections with the 4mm drill bit, and then put the magnets in. If you were to do that in the centre, as you can see there, me waving my hand, I think the centre part is just too thin to do it. And if you did that, then you could end up risking drilling through the armour panel. Now I'm going to start with a slightly smaller drill. So I think this is a 2.5 or 3mm drill bit, but this is good enough just to get me started here. So just going to drill out sort of exactly where I want these to go, just nice and light. I don't recommend using a Dremel here because if you do slip, you're going to go straight through that armour panel, and that would be bad because you'd end up having to do lots of filling and sanding on the outside, and you really want to avoid any more work than you're already doing. So I'm just sort of marking out the 4 areas that I'm going to be doing these magnets, and then you're going to have to drill the other side as well. So you're going to have to drill that the mounting part as well, obviously, to make sure that the magnets are fully flush. So these magnets don't fit in exactly as is, so I do need a larger drill bit. So I'm just going to hand turn this because the turns out I couldn't be bothered to go and change my Dremel because I couldn't find the tooling kit to change the drill bit on the end of it, and a 4mm drill bit won't fit in my pin vise. So, but because you've already made a start here, you can easily hand turn the drill bit in your hand, or just, you know, use a tissue or a glove or something like that just so you don't cut yourself. But it's an easy bit just to widen these holes out to 4mm, and you do want to make sure that you drill enough so that these magnets do lie 100% flush. If they all sort of stick up a little bit, then the armour panel will wobble around and it won't be the perfect result. So I've done that on this side, and fairly happy that those magnets, when I push them in under a little bit of force, will go in and will be nice and flush. So you can see here now, this is the result of those 4 magnets being placed in, and what we now need to do is work on the receiving part here. And you can see I've cut off sort of 2 sections of it and then drilled in the magnets on this one as well. So when we now align up, that armour panel isn't going anywhere. That's got 4 decent magnets on it and is perfectly done. We just need to rinse and repeat that process on the other one. So let's just see how that's going to work. So depending whether this gun is going to be left or right-handed, that will go on this one. So this would be a right-handed bellicosa, a Volcano Cannon at this angle. And then once we attach that piece, it will look like that. It's just trying to hold the bracket in place with the other hand, but that's what it will look like when it's fully done. And as you can see, that hole in the middle there would be obscured by this armour panel, and that is the main reason why we're going through this entire process anyway. So there we go then, guys. That is going to wrap this video up. We have completed both of the Volcano Cannons for the Warlord now, so that's all its main armaments all complete, as well as most of the legs and the torso. So not a huge amount left on the build really. We've still got some of the close support weapons, there's some las cannons and some smaller bolt cannons, a few bits and pieces like guardrails and stuff like that that need to be done on the main body. We need to do some of the head, although I'm not going to be fully assembling that because it would be a pain to paint if it was all assembled. So the next 2 videos really should see the finale of the build. So I'm thinking the next one will be completion of the legs with all the pistons and making sure that is together, maybe put the toes on, stuff like that. And then the final one will be the last bits of detailing before we are ready to prime this beast. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.